All right, last example, and then I'm done. I'm tired today, guys. This is hard getting back. Oh well. I'll probably live. All right, last one. Factored by grouping. A little bit harder to factor this. You should have seen factored by grouping a little bit somewhere in your past, either in Algebra 2 or Precal. If you don't know what that is, look it up. You should know it. Factored by grouping. Let's go for it. Here we're going to group the first two, and then we're going to group the last two. And what you're going to see is out of this group, what could I factor out? And then out of that group, what could you factor out? And then hopefully some stuff will line up for you. So let's look at doing this one by groups. Just looking at the first two terms, right? I've got an x cubed plus 3x squared. The common term in both of those, it looks like you could factor out is an x squared. So out of these first two, I could factor out an x squared, and if I factor out x squared, you're going to be left over with x plus 3. Remember, when you factor something out, what you're doing is division. So I had x cubed, divided it by x squared, was left with x. Had 3x squared, divided it by x squared, left with 3, right? You just do division to figure out what's left over. If I factored out the x squared, was left over the x plus 3 chunk. Let's look at this second group then, which is the third and the fourth term. What you can factor out of both of those is a negative and a 4. So let's factor out negative 4, and let's see what is left over inside the parentheses. And the goal is that hopefully this that chunk ends up matching the other chunk, right? What you factor out of the individual pieces doesn't really make that much of a difference, but I need to, when I factor it by grouping, I need to end up having these two chunks inside the parentheses match, right? Let's see. If I factor out the negative 4, I'm going to have x. Don't forget, you factor out the negative. So negative 12 divided by negative 4, that is a plus 3. And look at that, it matches, right? It's almost like someone planned it that way. Spoiler alert, I did. Right, so let's see. Now that I've got this factored initially, I can see that both of these chunks have the x plus 3 grouping in them. So now I'm actually going to factor this all the way out to the front. So factor out the x plus 3. Factor this out, and then you can see you've got an x squared minus a 4, which I've just kind of regrouped together. You could do brackets, or you could put parentheses. I don't know. I just put the brackets for whatever reason. This will actually factor a little bit farther. It's the difference of two squares. So it's going to factor into plus 2 minus 2. And then that took a little bit of work, right? Factor by grouping. It's extra algebra, but those extra 3 steps of algebra, it's going to make the questions a little bit harder, right? But the extra algebra should not be the reason why you miss a calculus question. That's kind of the whole entire point of the last 4 years of your life, is to make you ready for this class, right? So if you have trouble with the algebra, just utilize resources, Google it, Khan Academy it, figure out how to get it done. Anyways, here we go. Negative 3, negative 2, and 2. Those are my special values. Throw them down on the number line. They're all x-intercepts. Remember, the only ones that are undefined are your asymptotes, which come from factors in the denominator. Here, they're all just in the numerator. So they're all zeros, which is wonderful. If I plug in something to test for this interval, right, something like 3, this chunk is going to be positive. That chunk is going to be positive. 3 minus 2, that would be positive. So if I test this subinterval by plugging in a number bigger than 2, all 3 of the chunks are positive, which means overall positive. A good test number for this middle interval would be 0. 0 plus 3, 0 plus 2, 0 minus 2. So that one's going to be negative overall. Something like negative 2.5 would work here. Negative 2.5 plus 3 would still be positive. Barely. Negative 2.5 plus 2, that would barely be negative. Negative 2.5 minus 2 would be negative. I have 2 negatives, they're going to cancel, so overall it's positive. And then for this last interval, something like negative 20, negative, 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 which means overall negative. Again, you could think about how they're all multiplicity 1, which means all of those x-intercepts are going to end up crossing. So as soon as you know this, you know it's going to cross. Then you know it's going to cross. then you know it's going to cross. Really, as soon as you know the first one, if you understand the multiplicity and whether it crosses or bounces, you can easily fill in the rest of them without doing all the pluses and minuses. But I think it's probably a good idea to just always just make sure you're covering your bases. All right, now let's see. What we want at the end are the values that produce out positives. So I don't want that interval, I don't want that interval, and I don't want the zeros. So I'm going to want all the stuff between -3 and -2, then all the stuff bigger than 2. So here we go. This interval, but non-inclusive, because we did not want to include those, and then everything bigger than 2. So those sign chart, the number line test type questions, they're a little bit tricky. You maybe would have done something like it in Precal. If you forgot it, I don't really blame you. But this is an important skill. Testing to see whether something is positive or negative is going to be a skill that we use quite frequently this year. Hopefully it makes sense. If you need help with it, you feel free to email me or just look up YouTube videos. Just keep practicing. Hopefully these notes helped. Hopefully doing the homework questions will help. But yeah, these sign chart stuff's a little bit harder. In the next video, we'll talk about and we'll review some trig equations. And then the video afterwards, we'll do some exponentials and logs. But we're going to wrap it up for today. We'll see you next time. Well, won't really see you. You'll just awkwardly hear me.